Good afternoon, Jim12's here, and it is the 11th of November 2022, and here I am on the Great North Walk again in my favourite spot in the woods just northwest of Cherrybrook, and Cherrybrook is just northwest of Sydney, within Sydney really. It's a oasis of nature within the metropolitan region. Now, thank you for tuning in and watching this video. I really would love you to consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. It really helps the channel. I'm quoting other people there, you may have noticed. I think it does. We'll see. Anyway, today I would like to talk to you under the title, How Then Should We Live? And Where Are We Now? Where Are We Now is the subtitle. How Then Should We Live is the main title. This is a long video and it's probably going to turn into an essay, I hope, in the near future. So sit back, have a good coffee, and I hope you like coffee, and let's get going. First of all, the big picture. I find that all too often human nature, every conversation, every thought that we have naturally veers off the big picture but focuses on the immediate and the latest sensation, the latest shock. And all we seem to see is a series of flashes of something spectacular. And we think we're seeing the big picture, but we're not. We're just seeing the individual flashes. For example, the latest Prime Minister of the UK. How long will he last? Very good question. The elections in this month, in November, in Victoria, Australia, and the US. What will happen there? The cost of fuel, whether or not it's subsidised or not. The delivery date for a new car or motorbike. That could be the all-consuming focus of our lives, and rightly so. The latest Labour government's budget in Australia that cut a whole bunch of Morrison government investments, and of course the Labour government is going to get brownie points for being responsible, and the Conservatives under Morrison, who have the label of being responsible, are now labelled not so responsible. And another flash that we seem to see so many times. What about the senility and the incompetence of the US leadership at the moment? Who is actually running arguably the most influential nation on the planet? So let's not focus on the immediate and the sensational, but let's try and find the big picture. My second point, I'd like to talk to you about thinking, and two aspects of thinking. Are we evaluators or are we responders? If we're a responder, we accept the facts, we make an assumption that authority above us has our best interests at heart, and we are assured that the experts, and we are not, have done all the checks and balances and all the evaluation to come up with the best direction. That's a responder's perspective, I guess, as opposed to an evaluator's response. an evaluator's perspective on the world, where they question everything. For example, it would appear that around the world, I would argue in every country that would claim to be a democracy, I would say that democracy is broken. The agenda, no matter which party is in power, is simply big business or the World Economic Forum. And I've got competition above, in the air. The elections won't change anything unless there's a absolute categorical break with the doctrine of net zero and woke ideology. So I am listening for that, and whether or not such a party or leader will get into power. And if I'm an evaluator, I'm not as dumb as the media make me out to be. When we only get given one side of a story or a situation, that to me is evidence that they don't want the public to think. So watch out and listen for whether you hear two sides of an issue. Thank you. If you don't, if you just hear the one side, to me that's evidence that they don't want you to think. But you can think. My third section, fear or faith. Let me talk about fear first. Fear of the unknown is quite normal. It's instinctive, it's in our genes, and that's fine, absolutely fine, fear of the unknown. But I would argue that education is the antidote to fear of the unknown. The more we know, the more we research, the less we don't know, and the less we don't need to fear. Fear of pain and death. Again, quite normal, but let's not get these out of balance without the knowledge that God, I believe, has a plan and purpose for every one of us. So he knows about pain, he knows about death, he has an answer to both of those. And let's choose not to focus on the pain, but to focus on God. Hey? And also, my last point on the fear. Let's think about people who would claim to be pessimists, or would they claim to be an optimist. It would seem to me in life that if we expect the worst, we get it. A typical example to me would be if you're a teacher and you expect your class to play up, they can read you and therefore they'll play up. Mind you, alternatively, if you expect your class to be the best and get down to their work and be enthusiastic about it, they probably will. So that's my section on fear, as opposed to, no, I've got one more point on fear. What do we feed on? Are we feeding our fear? It's a bit interesting what we gravitate towards, what ideas, what information we want to hear. And I think we need to check whether or not those are feeding our fears. And next section, faith. I believe that we're all fearfully and wonderfully made, and nothing is going to change that. We're a special creation. We're created in God's image, which is so humbling. We're created in God's image. That's every single one of us, whatever our shape, creed, colour, etc. so easy to become accustomed to the evolutionary way of thinking, which is godless and a self-centered view of the world. God is in control. He knows what's happening. Evil has been defeated. We are called to walk by faith, not by sight. And I believe that our churches must preach against fear, because there's a lot of it about, and model faith to the world round about us. And it would be fantastic if our church leaders were shouting that from the rooftops. I'm sure some are. My next section, germs versus good health. Two worldviews. Which do you follow? Now, when I was growing up, I distinctly remember, this would be 60s, 70s, I guess, I distinctly remember in England that there was a sort of tussle between the Western medicine mindset and the Eastern mindset. And basically England was poo-pooing the Eastern and looking down on it somewhat. I think if that was the case, let's see where we are today. So let me go through, first of all, a list of features of the Western medicine approach. A dominance of the idea of infection and the necessity for cleanliness. I agree, but should it be an obsession? The assumption that there's one cause for every disease or sickness, and we've got to find that cause, that germ. There's a focus all the time on the development of new drugs to save humanity, and it's backed by, of course, big pharma, big pharmaceutical companies. They also roll out new vaccines time and time again. And I would argue, side note, that the last 2 years, when the vaccines have been rolled out around the world, that, to my memory, has been the biggest drug trial the world has ever seen. Absolutely phenomenal success. And what were they doing? I believe they were trialing trans-humanism, as in a blend between humans and digital electronic AI, artificial intelligence. And I believe that that is the goal of society, to create a transhuman generation to replace what we've known so far. That was an aside. Number 5 on the Western, big business and government regulations control Western medicine. Stress is a huge contributor to sickness and disease, I believe, and so do many doctors. So watch your level of stress. And finally, we become dependent on medicine, on doctors, because they know and we don't. They do the thinking, evaluating, and we don't. Whereas the Eastern medicine focuses on natural remedies that they might gain from trees and plants, not artificially created chemicals. They focus on personal responsibility for our health. They focus on a healthy diet and exercise, minimizing stress, maximizing gut health, building up our immune system. And they say that sickness and disease is actually a reflection of the body dealing with the toxins of our life, our diet, our stress perhaps, and that's the symptoms that we see when we are sick. It's actually not something external that's come in and is infecting us, but rather the body doing its bit to eradicate waste. And it's got pretty good systems for doing that. So, in summary, the Western medicine, it could be summarized as dependence, and the Eastern one is independence. Number 5, my 5th major point. I've entitled this The Fourth Industrial Revolution and Transhumanism. The media, the mainstream media, is largely silent about this, but this does not mean it's not true. So, what is in the Fourth Industrial Revolution? The Western world's acceptance of climate change as a religion. No discussion or question, consensus is the king, and it's the central theme of the World Economic Forum. Mark my words, read up on it, that's absolutely central to their whole overall world policy. Number 2, the Western world's complete harmony in 2020 over the C19 outbreak. No government debate that I'm aware of around the Western world, every single one in harmony, as if there was a overall conductor saying, yes, now do this. And the states just followed, threw away their own pandemic action plans, and followed the latest World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization's instructions. No questions asked, off we go, in harmony. Point C, democracy is broken. Both Labour and Conservatives are now equal. The minor parties are only gaining a minor traction, with the exception recently of Italy and their Conservatives, who've been labelled, of course, neo-fascists. They simply want to support families and the individual, and individual choice and autonomy. They want to respect their borders. They want to build up their own economy. All terrible things, apparently. But anyway, I digress. D, the Dutch farmers being driven off their land, the best farmers in the world, the most productive, the most conscientious, and they're being asked to sell their land because they want to build a mega city, and they also want to reduce our connection to normal farming. Sri Lanka, a failed state now, through its blind adherence to the green agenda. Inflation, E this is, blamed on Russian invasion of Ukraine, creating food shortages and fuel shortages. No, inflation was totally predicted from 2020 when Western governments printed money and crippled their economies by making us state dependent, by following the World Economic Forum and WHO agendas. For example, the meal and holiday vouchers, the COVID payments, where was all that going to come from? Obviously, it was going to create inflation, and it has. F, digital surveillance. Vax passports, vax to keep your job, the push for a cashless economy, basically the push for a social credit system as per China. I experienced being forbidden to enter my local council offices to talk to inquiries or a councillor. I was forbidden to buy a coffee in some locations, and I and many others have been forbidden to fly to some countries. For what? Censorship of the social media. Introduction of the terms misinformation and disinformation. The central narrative. For example, New Zealand's claim, we are the single source of truth. To hear that from a government would drive me insane. If they claim they're the single source of truth, that is preposterous, and it's a mockery of my intelligence. The media's impotence. This is H. The media used to hold governments and institutions accountable. Now they're part of the government machine. They've all been bought out, the mainstream media, by big business and left-wing ideology and the education system, so that naturally there's never a question, there's simply a parroting of the central narrative, single central narrative. This is wrong. This is counter-intelligence. Propaganda, by definition, is a one-sided story. So if you're only hearing one side, how do you know it's not propaganda? Well, I think we need to assume it is propaganda. Truth is the first casualty of war, often said. And cancel culture, woke and snowflakes, coupled with the impotence of the police force to manage anything other than hate crimes. What about gang rapes in some European cities that make it unsafe for any women of any race to be around alone, daylight or night, for fear of being raped? And that's simply because the police forces are too afraid to offend the minorities and bring them to justice. So the police forces are not keeping our cities safe. Another example, a climate activist in Australia who came from Lismore has been acquitted of causing gridlock in Sydney in the traffic system one day because of her climate change trauma. I find that mind-boggling. To my last section, which I've entitled, What Can We Do? In other words, how then should we live? And I've got 10 points. Coming into the home straight, here we go. In faith that God is in control and knows the outcome of everything. He's not fazed, therefore we don't need to have fear or panic or sleepless nights. So live in faith that God's got this. Number 2, question everything. Keep joining the dots. Make sure that we are creating the narrative and not we're imbibing the narrative. 3, seek to engage in conversation with anybody, in debate, in dialogue, discussion, respectfully, of course, face to face where possible, digitally if we have to, but let's have debates. And I love you to write in the comments whether you like what I'm saying, whether you don't, what you want to take issue with and why. Don't just say, Jim, this is a load of garbage. Please have reasons, but I'd love you to put into the comments. 4, increase our personal responsibility and decrease our state dependence. 5. Live and support locally. Respect global for its diversity. We don't all want to become cookie cutters, all the same, living in little boxes, all the same. No, uniformity isn't going to help us, but respect for diversity will. 6. One world government will only bring anarchy, in my view, and chaos, and greater inequality and greater dependence. Independence of mind and action, microfinancing, education, genuine education, will bring in greater peace, harmony, equity, and better sustainability of outcomes for the planet. Collectively, with education, we can make so much of a difference. And we don't need to be dictated to. Notice the use of the word. 7. Stay alert to support any genuine equity and national movement that gives people a say and their bodily autonomy. Stay alert for that. Look for that. 8. Steward the Earth's resources responsibly and respectfully. Under that heading, I've got resist consumerism, champion recycling, minimize our footprint on the planet, spend time in nature, like me today, take pictures, leave footprints only, study up on climate and weather systems, and specifically the difference between climate and weather, which is fundamental. Number 9, 2 to go. Champion relationships. We are better together. We are designed, I believe, for relationship with God, vertical, and relationship with people, horizontal. They need to be big in our lives, I believe. And finally, focus on the development of our character. We can't change others. We can only change ourselves. Think about it. It's true. We can't change anybody else. They have to change themselves. And finally, be proactive and not reactive to circumstances. Thank you so much for listening. Love to hear your comments, and have a safe, wonderful day. God bless. Bye.